Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. The T20 World Cup is only 11 days away. Our build up to that goes up a gear today as we go through the squads of the likely contenders, as well as going back to England's first men's T20 World Cup triumph in 2010 with Michael Yardy. There's a great county championship round to talk through. There's more England test debates to touch on and much, much more. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today are Ben Gardner and CricViz analyst Ben Jones. Mark Butcher will be joining us later in the show. Let's quickly start on the county championship, which had a very, very fun round of games. There were several very tight finishes. Derbyshire clinging on for a draw 9 down against Northants. Sussex beating Yorkshire by 21 runs. Middlesex beating Glamorgan by 2 wickets. Essex overturning a 235-run first innings deficit against Warwickshire. Surrey coming back from being 15 for 4 against Worcestershire. Durham nearly chasing 475 against Lancs. Absolutely loads going on. Ben, what was your favourite?
It's hard, but what was also great was it's a perfectly paced round of games. You had different bits of intrigue at different points, and then even by the very last, even by 6 p.m, you still had 3 games that actually still you weren't sure exactly what was going to happen in them. But if I had to pick one for the whole package of the game, I think it would be that Essex game in terms of the swings to and fro, because Essex took wickets early in the first morning. You had a big lower partnership, big 100 for Ed Barnard. Then Essex would run through, and then the scale of that comeback, and even then it had a blow in the chase. Losing wickets early on, but just obviously it's almost like Surrey are so dominant that you end up just rooting for any team who can pose any sort of challenge. But there is something really sort of admirable about the way that Essex can just rest that kind of situation, just because of how the confidence they have in that bowling attack. Basically, that it didn't feel like, even when they conceded a 200-run deficit, you actually feel like they kind of could still just rattle through a team here. Like Sam Cook is that good, and it wasn't him today, but Simon Harmer was that good, and in the end it was kind of Matt Critchley who takes 4 wickets. But that's kind of what they do, and then they lose early wickets, and then still they have again the belief to put it through. And Jordan Cox, obviously Matt Critchley, fun moment, end of the game, 99 not out. At the non-striker's end, you get the no ball, and there's nothing really that Simon Harmer can do. You sort of see it on the scorecard. You see that he scored a 4, and you think what's he done to his fellow spinner? Denying him an unbeaten 100 in a
great reaction
comeback.
From Critchley though.
Yeah, and from Harmer as well. Harmer looks pretty annoyed that he's hit it for 4, but there's nothing you can do. It's one of those ones that you just kind of rise down, and if there's no fielder there and you catch it right and in the right direction, it is just going to go for 4. It's not like a drive where you can sort of half time it, or just not put your bat through it and then just get the single if it's a short ball and you're using the pace, all you can do. But the reaction from Critchley is great. He just fully celebrates and then has a kind of what are you going to do grin on his face.
But also the game's close enough that you can't contrive it too much. The runs are there.
Yeah.
You've got to take them. I've had the pleasure of sharing a dressing room with Matt Critchley at Welsh Fire a few years ago, and he's an astonishingly lovely man. Mm-hmm. So I was not in any way surprised by seeing the way that he reacted to that.
Yeah.
But it is just I think we often overdo the whole isn't cricket a bizarre old thing? But actually in that scenario, it's this little confluence of personal and team goals was lovely, especially because Essex do actually still end up coming through and winning.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of standout individual performances this round. So Zach Crawley followed up scores of 5, 4, 41, 6, 10 and 0 with 238, which was very on brand. Crawley averages 38 this season with that 238. But arguably the knock of the round was Ollie Robinson's 171 not out in the 4th innings for Durham against a Lancashire attack that had Nathan Lyon. It didn't quite take them over the line, but it wasn't far off. Chasing 475 nearly made it happen. Ben, we talked about Surrey's Jamie Smith last week and how he might have already usurped Dan Lawrence as England's spare batter. There's a lot of talk about him potentially being a wicketkeeper. He doesn't do that very often for Surrey. But is Ollie Robinson as exciting a talent as Jamie Smith?
I think the excitement is subjective. I think in terms of who is the most ready to play Test cricket in 2024, I think it's Ollie Robinson. I think the way that he played Lyon across the course of innings, across the course of the game, faced 72 balls, I think, scored 43, so scored a decent lick. But I think he was 8%, 7% false shots, so extremely controlled, essentially. So if we're taking that as your audition, basically doesn't really get harder in terms of facing spin in Test cricket. Maybe conditions could be more in favour of the bowler, but in terms of the personnel involved, Robinson's really risen to the challenge there. And I think that the style of the way that he bats, I know Smith's hardly, he's hardly meek, but Robinson is more in that kind of Matt Pryor role of it's orthodox shots, but with an aggressive intent, keeping things moving. We saw some of the issues with the way that Ben Foakes kind of paced his innings in India, particularly when he's batting with the tail. I think England have paid a lot of attention to that and would like to move towards a guy who can be a little bit more proactive, a little bit more kind of taking control in the latter stages of the innings.
And it wasn't just his survival, by the way, against Lion. I watched a lot of that innings, and there were individual shots. You're like, yeah, that is what Test players do. There's one sweep shot that he pinged through mid-wicket that was miles outside off stump, very much like reacting to what the field was. He also slog swept seamers for 6 and proper slog sweeps where your right knee is on the ground and you're hitting him over deep wicket for 6.
But also, he wasn't sweeping every ball. I think that's the thing. Sometimes you get that kind of like almost impulsive, compulsive sweeping, and you think, is this sustainable when you're facing a bowler of a slightly higher caliber? But it was selective. It was done on length and line. And actually, as a result, I don't think anyone who watched that came away thinking this is a guy that can't do it in Test cricket. He'll take a bit of time, but I'm sure you guys have spoken already about that top 6 is pretty settled for England. The number 7 role, the keeper role, is the only opportunity really this summer, a quiet summer, a summer that England should win 6-0, to actually experiment and to maybe develop the batting lineup. And I think Robinson is probably, for me, purely personal opinion, backed up by a few numbers as you'd hope, that I think he's the coming man and he's who they should probably go with at Lords.
Ben, do you agree?
Well, I guess for me, there's 5 contenders for it. There's the 2 we've mentioned. Well, yes, we mentioned Smith, Robinson, Foakes. It's probably worth dwelling on Foakes because Surrey have this odd situation at the moment where they've got that top 7. All of them are averaging 50, except from the 2 that are currently in the England Test team. Basically, are both averaging mid-20s in Ollie Pope and Ben Foakes. And the situation is just changing slightly with Foakes in that there were times when he was, one of the best county batters in the country, as well as, a brilliant wicketkeeper. And that is not true this season. And coming off that series in India where the batting did come up short in quite like a specific type of way, that England will take note of that, I think. So he is probably, I'd actually be most surprised almost if he plays out of the 5. So Bairstow is, I think, probably the most likely to play, but there is just a question of, age still, that he's not, he had a good sum with the bat last year, but he's not quite reached that best form since his injury, and he will have just played so much cricket in the lead up to that West Indies series that if they were to give someone a go, they could do that. The other interesting guy I think is Phil Salt, who I've mentioned on this podcast before, who I interviewed before the start of the season, who has a good county record across the last couple of years, averaging just above 40 for Lancs across a whole season's worth of games. Is obviously in the form of his life, and I can see how that story builds, where he has a brilliant T20 World Cup off the back of a brilliant IPL. People are sort of thinking like, hang on, why isn't this guy in the Test team? When I can see how that ends up checking boxes, but equally, I can definitely see the argument for Robinson. So that would be my order of.
I think, I completely agree, and I can see why people like all 5 of those individuals for different reasons. I think with Robinson, it's worth specifically saying that he probably appeals to lots of different characteristics that are valued. So
correct, yeah.
Out of all those guys, Foakes aside, he keeps regularly in 4-day cricket and has done for a long time. His keeping is highly rated, not Ben Foakes level, but no one is rated at Ben Foakes level.
It's also much improved. I think you speak to anyone who knows their stuff in county cricket, who watch these guys week in, week out. He's gone to another level in the last 18 months. And I think that's really important. I think the Salt selection would have the slight air of Jason Roy opening in the Ashes in 2019, where you're like, we can't not pick this guy. Whereas actually, I think the bold selection is to say, Phil, you're one of the best white ball openers in the world across formats. Just stick with that. We've got other options. They haven't actually got as many options to open in white ball cricket. I'd be anxious about ruining Phil Salt, the white ball player, rather than, and shock. But rather than necessarily, I think they've got other options. And I think Ollie Robinson is, as you say, a broader package. If you want the keeper, he appeals to that cabal. If you want the batting, he has the body of work behind him.
So can he pick as well, just from a PR point of view? If you're trying to appease the county purists, he has that body of work as well as also, and
he's from Durham as well.
Yes, yeah, and also it's notable that the run season have come in Division 1. There was just that question mark last season. 100%. He had obviously a brilliant record in that promotion campaign, but you do just, like you just wonder about the quality of bowling and the but as you know, the line is just that's a snapshot of it that it's been this season against a high standard.
And Ben Stokes at the other end for some of that innings as well, which must be helpful.
Yeah, I mean,
if you're going to pick a time to make your runs, do it then.
Had his role in the defeat though, Ben Stokes. They were going well, and then they needed about 100 to win, and then he premeditates a reverse sweep against the part timer, gets bowled, and then the collapse happens, and then they lose. So. Maybe that's where the spot in the middle order comes up.
Ben Gardner suggests that England should play 2 wicketkeepers and drop Ben Stokes. It's a fascinating balance call.
Stokes actually took 5 wickets in the second innings there on his return to bowling full time. Really played 7 Test matches in a row as a specialist batter before the final Test in India, and in that fifer he bowled a 10 over spell towards the end of it as well. So significant,
and it was
good
sharp.
Signs.
He bowled sharply. Like, I watched every ball of it, and it was it looked something like Stokes back at his best, so fingers crossed.
That's good to see. Just another funny moment from this round of games. Zach Crawley was on 99 when Tom Lambie, bowling his left arm seam, got it slightly wrong and ended up being a double bouncer that basically left the strip, and Crawley on 99 says thank you very much, plops it into the gap, picks up a single, but the umpire's called dead ball because there is a law that says that if the ball makes the batter completely leave the pitch, it should be called dead ball and a no ball. Basically correct from the umpires, but Crawley didn't quite leave the pitch, so technically incorrect. But I think the umpires deserve credit for being able to recall that very rarely used regulation.
It's the first time Crawley's left anything in about 2 years, to be fair. So.
It's also one of those where if you know the rule, you're really keen to apply it, kind of thing. So you're like, I know that, and you don't actually check to see if it's actually the case or not.
Actually.
Ben, the other big selection debate that we've talked about before on the show is heading into the Test summer is who makes up that England bowling attack. This week it was confirmed that Josh Tongue will miss at least the West Indies series. Jamie Overton will miss the entirety of the Test summer. Already we know that Jofra Archer won't play Test cricket this summer, however well he goes in the T20 World Cup. There's no Anderson, no Broad. It is interesting. It is not immediately obvious who makes up that attack. You think that Woakes will be involved. You think Mark Wood will play some part in the Test summer. Who would you go with? What do the numbers say?
Thanks, Yas. Told you specifically not to say that before the podcast. It's interesting that you've said that you think Woakes will be involved. I think that he's in a very odd position as a home one format specialist now who's not nailed on necessarily to play in that format.
Yeah.
But you would say the way that he played last summer and, adding that little bit of batting depth, England for once, for the first time in a while, look like they're going to have a slightly long tail across formats, actually. We'll come to that in the T20 discussion later. And actually, he does offer that slightly broader package. I think that he will probably play 3 or 4 tests. I don't think anyone's going to play every test this summer for all kinds of reasons. But I think that from the numbers side of things, what's interesting is that the standout candidate is the guy who is nominally the incumbent, which is Ollie Robinson, the bowler one, not the keeper one. This season, obviously, he's not torn up trees completely, but he's done as you'd expect an international class bowler to do in the Championship.
And worth saying, he just had his best round. So he took 7 for not many in Sussex's win against Yorkshire, including, so Sussex won by 21 runs. Yorkshire needed 25 with 4 wickets in hand. Lyde was in, he was on 70 odd, and Robinson gets him with a really sharp bouncer, having already dismissed Sharma in that inning. So that was a really important performance because he hadn't quite done that yet this season.
And it's the kind of wicket that when he first came into Test cricket, he arrived with the reputation of this is a guy who can prize out batters on flat decks when they're set, and that wasn't really the kind of bowler we saw in Test cricket, or haven't seen so far. So it was a bit of a throwback. But just on the number side of things, he's 30% full shots this season, so just under 1 in 3, twice and over. He's beating the bat or taking the edge. It's the best by any bowler in any season in the Championship that we've got on record.
So that's Ollie Robinson this season.
Ollie Robinson this season.
That is so this is why I find the underlying data fascinating, because before this round, his conventional numbers weren't that good.
Exactly. And so that's why it's useful to have that kind of slightly predictive data behind it. Just going by that metric, Ollie Rob obviously very much top, 130%. Sam Cook, 28%. I think that's hardly a surprise to anyone who's seen him bowled or looked at his figures. But I think the most interesting one of that is that third among the England qualified seamers, I think Dan Worrell slots in between these two, but is Dylan Pennington at 22%. So according to guys who are going by this metric of how often are you forcing mistakes from batters, how often are you kind of getting them on the back foot, Pennington really does rather well. And I think that there's a lot of people this season that have just seen, they've looked at his speeds and he's bowling 84, 85. He's forcing mistakes. He is taking wickets, not at an outrageous rate, but he is taking them enough, at a good enough average, to be in the conversation. And I think with so many guys on a level, he really stands out. The one other metric which I do quite like is looking at just records against top order batters or like top 6 batters. And that's actually something not great for Ollie Rob, averaging 29 against top order batters, which obviously very human, but compared to his slightly inhuman average against everyone overall, like you say, the way that he rattled through the tail against Yorkshire, very much kind of skewed those numbers. Someone who does really well by that is Jamie Porter. Fantastic record against top order batters this season. I think he's averaging just under 23. Pennington and Cook also both do well, as does Gus Atkinson, as we sit here at the Oval looking out across the slightly wet outfield. And Robinson actually does poorly by that. So it's which numbers do you back? Which are you backing the overall body of work, or are you backing the kind of consistency against specifically qualified batters? Just one that I do want to throw in as well is that my personal favourite of this crop of bowlers, if you take out Ollie Rob, that I've been a champion of for a while, I'm going to claim some credit for that one, is Matt Potts. And I think Potts has the pace and style. You look at his length in Test cricket, it's almost identical to Cummins and Hazelwood. I think if you're looking 18 months in advance and thinking who's going to bowl first change, take the new ball there. Potts has really struggled against top order batters this season and last season as well as an overall, again, body of work. He's averaging 58 this season against top 6. Another guy that I know the ECB are really keen on, and he's not really entered the conversation fully, is Bryden Carse. This season averaging north of 250 against top order batters. So not necessarily the kind of records that you'll be banging out before a very open selection era. But I think the kind of fundamental point is that no one stands out. Yeah, everyone stands out by different metrics. Everyone stands out by, are you looking at speed? In which case, Carse comes into it again, Gus comes into it again. But if you're looking at consistency, Sam Cook's at the top of the thing, JB Porter's at the top of the rankings. It's really tricky, and that's the job of the selector, is to look at all of this data, all of the scouts' records, watch it yourself, sit down in a dark room, and stick a pin in a map, basically. I guess
what's quite interesting this summer and how it differs to previous summers is that there are multiple gaps in the bowling attack. They're up for grabs. So previously, a couple of guys called Anderson, Broad generally took the new ball. Whereas this summer, there is at least one new ball spot available in the side. And it's highly, highly, highly unlikely that Mark Wood plays all 6 test matches. So the role of the first change, quicker bowler is also up for grabs. So that is why so many people are in the frame.
Yeah, and England have to tread the line between sort of developing and planning for the future and also making sure they do win these 2 series, and if they can, win all 6 test matches, because, that it's the lowest key home summer for a while. But I think, you look at the Sri Lanka batting lineup and there are some really impressive numbers in there. Okay, you can question that they might be inflated by certain things, but still there are some talented players there. And that West Indies bowling attack, we saw what they did against Australia. They're going to add Jaden Seals back into it, who I don't know if you've got those numbers, but I'd imagine he's pretty high on some of those as well. So that there are going to be times when England will be pushed this summer, and that's the thing with Chris Woakes. He's almost like a Jadeja light at home in some ways, in that he's just such like a cheat code, really, a guy who can bat that well, bat 7 if you need him to, and is just so effective with the ball. But is he planning for the future bowler? Is he your kind of one concession to making sure you win at home and you play the others, or do you try and just completely plan for the future with the others as well? So it's true, and I guess we might also see as well the first test. I suppose the attack's different because Anderson will be in there
if selected.
Yeah. And then I guess we'll see what happens if England were to win the first 2. Is it then that they go and try a bit different for the last 3? But there is a balance of tread there, because they could be 1-1 going to the third, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh gosh, we need to pick the attack we definitely think is going to win, and that might be quite different from the attack you think is going to be taking the field for the Ashes in 18 months' time.
But also, the Ashes is obviously the next big measurement that English cricket is going to judge itself by. But India next summer is massive. That's a tough series. At the moment, you'd say India are probably just about favourites for that. Given the transition they're going to be going through. Is Stokes going to be at his peak in 12 months' time? All of these other guys who have been bobbing along really well under Bazball, but are they going to revert to the mean? There's a lot going on. I think you want to have a look at Woakes this summer because you want to know if he's going to be around next summer. I think that's the biggie for me, because if he's not, then you can move on and you can properly throw all of these guys and really back them. But I think right now, you should be planning, or England should be planning, to have Chris Woakes as part of the attack next summer, and they need to get as much information out of him because of the reasons that we spoke about before. He doesn't play other formats. He doesn't play overseas. This is their chance to see, is Chris Woakes still an international class bowler? And I think that's probably the a gentle subplot for the summer when we're talking about challenges against Windies and Sri Lanka. They could easily lose a test this summer. It's not out of the question. They could lose several, but next year is the next big challenge, and that's that should inform most of the decisions, I think.
Weather permitting, Jofra Archer will make his England return tomorrow. He's not played a home international in front of fans since the Oval Ashes test in 2019. So fingers crossed we see him on the park soon. Anyway, here is Mark Butcher on England's opponents in that series, Pakistan, and the T20 World Cup more generally. We're less than 2 weeks away from the start of the T20 World Cup. England are playing Pakistan in a 4-match T20I series this week. Jofra Archer is expected to make his England return, and if he does play, it'll be his first home international in front of fans since the 2019 Ashes test at the Oval. So we're all really excited for that, of course. Butch, it does feel though that there's a World Cup every 5 minutes at the moment. And if 50-over cricket is heading towards the margins, is this the best way to generate interest around T20 World Cups, having them so close together?
Well, I mean, it's going to be 2 years, every 2 years from here to eternity, or until T5 cricket sort of takes over. It does leave you a little bit a little bit wanting in terms of having that anticipation for another global tournament. That the IPL still not over yet. The eliminators and qualifiers start today, isn't it? Where are we on the Tuesday the 21st? And it just feels as though there's, particularly this winter, and that could be very much from a UK point of view, in that there's the England team was in India for a while. It was kind of under the radar because of the way that it was broadcast. It feels as though it's just been a non-stop diet ever since probably SA20 back in January, IL20, PSL, IPL, all the rest of it. There has been nothing but T20 cricket. Then the IPL starting at the back end of March. There has been nothing but T20 cricket between January and now what will be June all the way through to July. And just for that reason, it kind of feels a little bit like, well, people have had enough. They'd rather, you want to get a little bit of variety into it. However, what I will say is that the ICC and their events committee and whatever, with World Cups being every 4 years, the narrowing of Champions trophies, which I think, we're going to have a Champions trophy beginning of next winter. There'll be another 50-over World Cup. There's basically a global event every year for the next 4, right? And not everybody is involved in all of them, and some of them will be in places. India has another global one. That the next T20 World Cup after this one is going to be back in India again. So you can understand why people on the outside are kind of yawning a little bit and going, "This is not all that attractive." However, I guarantee you, once it starts, with the grand difference between sort of international T20 cricket and franchise T20 cricket. Of course, you've got the sort of the national fervour and interest that goes along with that, but you also have the very different way, as you've mentioned before, that squads are put together. The resources are slightly more difficult to sort of pin down into great 11s. You don't have impact players. You can't just go out and buy whatever you need on the market. This is down to your domestic structure or whatever it might be in order to produce the best teams you have. And because of that, you actually end up perhaps with more interesting tournaments than you do in terms of the franchise stuff. And so what the hope is that the Caribbean and the United States will kind of rise to the occasion, particularly the interest of the games in New York and Dallas. And that suddenly the whole thing catches fire, and that's the hope rather than the expectation. But I've got a sneaking suspicion it's going to be a good one.
It's a change of conditions from one tournament to another. So in all those franchise leagues that happen at the same time of the year in the same part of the world every single year, there aren't as many surprises. Whereas here, you've got a broadly similar group of players will take part in this World Cup compared to the previous one, but in totally different conditions. From an English point of view, Sam Curran is the one that we talk about a lot. His stock slow ball on those massive grounds in Australia, he sort of gets hit, but the boundaries are so big that he picked up a lot of wickets caught in the deep. On the smaller grounds in the Caribbean, it's harder to do that. And that's just one example, but there's so many players who are better or worse against spin bowling. And in the Caribbean, that's generally a pretty good place to bowl spin. So that, I think, from a cricketing point of view, makes it much more interesting than franchise leagues that take place in the same place every single year.
Yeah, and the narratives are always based around that, aren't they? Because when you're talking about your national team, there'll be players, there'll be players who are kind of on the peripheries, or people whose careers are going on an upward spiral, and those in the opposite direction. And the narrative that goes throughout the tournament is far more interesting, you feel, because you're restricted to a squad of 15. The way that the management has to, and the captain has to balance the 11. The tough decisions that are made around the style of cricket that you're going to want to play in those different conditions that you're in, all create a much more interesting story, perhaps, than going from 1 week to the next. In a franchise tournament, particularly when those tournaments last over a very long period of time. So it's pretty short, it's pretty sharp. You're still going to have all the best players in the world there, but in 11s maybe where they don't have quite as much backup. And this doesn't go for every team, but where they don't have quite as much backup behind them as they might do for a franchise, and therefore their performances, their stories are going to be so much more important to the outcome for the international side. So look, I mean, I understand, I kind of get it that it's overkill, there's another one, but I have a funny feeling that it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. There are some fantastic players out there, and when you put think of South Africa for a story, for example, that monkey on their back around sort of not being able to get over the line, about stuffing it up, having looked the best team in qualifying, or the best team in the group stages or whatever. It's just another narrative, another part of the story that you don't necessarily get, that you don't carry with you in franchise tournaments. And that's why I think these things are a lot of fun.
We have talked a lot about England, and we will continue to do so over the next few weeks. But you've watched a lot of Pakistani cricket over the last couple of years. It feels like the debates around them are exactly the same as they always are. There are people questioning the rate at which Babar and Rizwan score, and there are guys who've done brilliantly in the PSL over not just 1 year, over multiple years, have come in. There's a lot of excitement around them, but for whatever reason, it hasn't quite worked for them. For Pakistan, which is interesting because actually a lot of bilateral series that they have played is not necessarily a higher standard of cricket than the top end of what happens in the PSL. You watch a lot of their players. Who would you hang your hat on in the Pakistani setup outside the obvious candidates like Babar and Rizwan?
Well, I mean, Saeem Ayub is fabulously talented. Usman Khan is very talented too, although I have a slight concern about him over sort of like higher pace bowling, particularly sort of above sort of chest high. And then you've got guys who've been around for a long time, people like Iftikhar and Fakhar and guys like that. And we're talking the batting here simply because the style of cricket that they're playing still seems to be stuck in about 10 years ago. In terms of posting scores of 170 and then hoping that your brilliant bowling, which it is going to be able to defend that sort of stuff for you. But I think, having seen as much of their cricket as I have, that there are enough exciting young players, guys who don't make squads, people like Mohamed Harris and things like that, to kind of rebuild that and to play in a much more daring way with the bat, and actually give their bowlers less stress in terms of having to always pull something out of the bag when they're defending totals, or even when they're bowling first. But that narrative has not changed, hasn't shifted in about 3 years or so. And one of the things that occurred to me is not that Rizwan and Babar are not great players or whatever, but that sort of that hierarchical idea kind of stresses out these younger guys who come into the dressing room, because none of them seem to be able to last for much longer than a week. They get given a small quantity of chances. and then find themselves on the outside. I mean, even somebody like Thacker, who's kind of one of the most successful T20 players and one of the guys with incredible strike rates and who can win games by himself, often finds himself sat on the bench. He's asked to go out there and do things that the more senior guys won't do or don't do. And then when he doesn't do it 100% of the time, finds himself sat on his backside. It's kind of, there must be quite a lot of stress, I think, involved in representing Pakistan on the batting side of things. And the only people who can really sort that out are those senior guys, which is kind of why it's not so much of an issue of the way they play, but it's perhaps an issue around how much responsibility they then take for trying to make the rest of the guys bring the guys up to the sort of standard that they have held over such a long period of time. Because there's only one, when you look at it over a long period of time, there's only one reason why highly talented players who do very, very well for their franchises against top class bowling go into that setup and then suddenly become a shadow of themselves. There's a culture issue in there for sure.
It's worth remembering though, they were a couple of deliveries away from qualifying for the T20 World Cup final in 2021. They could have won the final.
We're back to the narratives again. See,
But
this is exactly why the T20 is going to be brilliant, because the narrative is around Pakistan is again always the same. They've got their issues, they've internal struggles. They've got players who are not performing to the standards that they should be. You've got senior players who seemingly are kind of knocking it around and just padding their own stats. And then come competition time, they can beat anyone. And that doesn't change. When you've got that talent, that will not change. And so therefore, there's another story to throw into the pot. England's story will be, are they going to be able to shrug off the disaster of the 50 over World Cup, and are they going to come out and sort of batter everybody? Will South Africa choke? Are the West Indies going to be the surprise package once again by hitting more sixes than anybody else and just kind of muscling their way to the thing? There's all these wonderful stories around the tournament, which kind of, for me, they dispel any worry about the fact that there's been too much of it too soon and too little reward for the people having to tune in and watch it.
Can Kohli, etc., win a T20 World Cup?
There you go. I mean, the India question, just been it's been over 11 years now since this great, perhaps all-time great group of players for India has won a world tournament, and they're hosting most of them in their own backyard and still haven't won one. So the stories there are multiple.
Just on the conditions of the tournament, the business end of the tournament is all going to be held in the Caribbean. England, for example, only play in the Caribbean. What do you think? Which teams come into it more, given that's where the cricket's going to be played? Because we've seen when England have gone out there recently, they've been slow pitches, but with relatively short boundaries, and it's just been about six hitting. But that's not the only way to succeed on those sort of pitches. Actually, the Pakistan way of just getting yourself to 160 can also work. So who do you think? Yeah, who do you think comes into it?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think West Indies is incredibly dangerous at home, as they proved against England in that series before Christmas. Teams that can bat deep, teams that have got serious hitting power, and sometimes the bowling it's not secondary by any means, because I've always been at pains to say that even if the economy rates are really, really high, 1 over or a 3-ball spell can kind of win you the game. It's incredibly important. But I do think that your teams with batting depth, of which England are one, of course, and striking depth are going to be very, very dangerous, because you'd never really feel like you're out of it. I mean, there were times there in that England West Indies series where the rate surely had got up to 14s and 15s, and you still end up losing. Romario Shepherd comes in and hits the ball off the island, and kind of that's the end of the game. So I think batting depth is going to be crucial. At teams with that, and with 2 or 3 guys who at the end have got blood, ice cold blood in their veins with the ball, who might have gone around the park in the early stages, but somehow can pull 3 or 4, dot balls out of their backside at the back end. They're going to be 100% crucial.
Well, you got me excited for the tournament, Butch. Not long to go.
There you go.
There we go.
You were all doom and gloom at the beginning. It's going to be awesome.
all kicks off with USA Canada in 10 days' time. Cheers for your time, Butch. Catch you next week.
All right. No worries. Bye.
most of this T20 World Cup is in the Caribbean. A fair chunk of the group phase is in the US, but the business end of the competition is all in the Caribbean, and all of England's games will be in the Caribbean regardless of what happens. Part of the fun, Ben, of T20 World Cups is that they're played in conditions completely different to the last one. What should we expect from conditions in the Caribbean, and which team are the conditions likely to suit, if anyone?
I think the main thing is that it is a proper variety. You know, we're looking at the US grounds, and you've got a ground that doesn't exist, a ground that's barely played any T20 cricket, and one which has played a handful of games. It's not exactly a data-rich kind of tournament. And in the Caribbean, again, we've got grounds like Antigua, the Viv Richards, where again they haven't played much top-tier T20 cricket. In general, in the Caribbean, it's a bit of a divide between very, very high scoring and very, very low scoring. And I think that for England, the schedule's been quite kind. In the first round, they're going to play 2 games in Barbados, which is very high scoring. They're playing probably their 2 toughest games against Scotland and Australia in Barbados. And then they're going to Antigua, which is traditionally, although minimal sample, very low scoring, generally slow and low. And that's where they're playing Namibia and Oman. Now, England should progress out of that group into the Super 8s. When they get to the Super 8s, they play in St. Lucia, again, high scoring, and then they play in Barbados again. So I think, given that England will want to be playing expressive attacking cricket, the schedule's been kind. The downside is that the 2 venues for the semi-final, Guyana and Trinidad, or Guyana and the Brian Lara, are typically low scoring and slow scoring. So in the ideal world for England, where they get to the final, they will, they get to the semi-final rather, they'll obviously be ecstatic to have reached that stage, but they will suddenly be playing in very, very different conditions against teams who may have already played at that venue, it's kind of the fun of World Cups. Like you say, it's that you're testing different aspects of your squad and you're playing your technique. But it's I think that's what we're going to see is a very strong divide between the highs and the lows, the 220s and the 150s.
Other Ben, worth explaining just how weird the format is, because it doesn't really, as long as England are in the top 2 in their group, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter where they finish.
Yeah, it's really odd. So there's 2 seeded teams in each group. So there's 4 groups of 5, 2 seeded teams in each one. And if one of those teams or both these teams get through, it's already predetermined which Super 8 group they go into. So if all 8 seeds go through, and I guess we'll talk a bit later about what are the sort of groups of death. If all 8 seeded teams go through, and that might not be the case, but then England would be in a Super 8s group with Pakistan, West Indies, and South Africa, which could be easier, could be harder. The other group would be then
India, Australia, New Zealand, and Sri Lanka.
Yes, that's, I guess you've got a decent mix there. I think you probably slightly prefer to be in that first group. I guess it feels like there are 5 real standout teams, I think, which is England, South Africa, West Indies, Australia, and India, I would say. And England are with 2 of those rather than with 1 of those. So, but yeah, it's an odd format, and yeah, it's just weird because often in the World Cups you get the last group stage game, like, oh, do we want to lose this to get into the East group later on, and it just won't matter for England.
Yeah.
From a practical perspective, it does mean that the first round, seed 1 versus seed 2 games don't have a huge amount riding on them, provided you mop up against the smaller sides. So England, Australia, if England go out and beat Scotland, Oman and Namibia, then they can afford to lose to Australia, and it has absolutely zero bearing on the rest of their progression. They'll go into the same group, they'll play the same teams. Obviously, psychologically, it's not as good. You want to be 4 from 4 in that opening stages. But it is interesting just on the format as well. I think it's largely been done in order to allow travelling fans to know where they're going, because obviously in the second stage, England fans can now book flights to St. Lucia and Barbados. We know all the traditional stuff about England and the Caribbean, taking the Barmy Army out, etc. I think hopefully the benefit of this slightly contrived group state, or this slightly contrived structure, put your teeth in, Ben, is that we get bigger neutral crowds, or bigger crowds for non-West Indies games across the tournament, which hopefully benefits the thing as a whole. It does also mean that, if you're in a group with Pakistan, England, West Indies and South Africa, anyone can beat anyone. That is a very, very competitive group. And to be honest, the other one as well, India, Australia, New Zealand, Sri Lanka, anyone can still beat anyone. I can very, very easily see both of those groups coming down to net run rate, which again brings in those those games which might be considered dead in the third of the group games. I think actually that level of attention to detail, as it were, could be really, really important. And again, hopefully that enriches the tournament. Yeah, if you're trying to take the positives out of a slightly artificial structure, hopefully that's one of them.
England, obviously defending champions, a big part of their success in 2022 was their extraordinary all-round depth. So out of the 11 that played in the final, you had 7 genuine bowling options in the 11. You had Adil Rashid at 11. And if you compare that to other sides, very, very few teams had that sort of depth with either bat or ball, and certainly not both. Ben, you alluded to it earlier. Is the all-round depth as strong in 2024?
No. I think the absence of Ben Stokes is significant, not because Stokes is a particularly incredible T20 player. He's a solid performer, but England's overall lack of seam bowling around has slightly constrained them. So Sam Curran, who's not necessarily had the best IPL and has been struggling in T20 cricket for a little while, was always pretty much a lock for the squad because there wasn't really an option pushing him. It's your Lewis Gregory's, it's your Bryden Carses, who are a tier below, no matter Curran's poor form. I think they're probably going to line up, something like Sultan Butler. Sultan had such a fantastic tour of the Windies. He's got the second best T20I average in the Caribbean behind Mike Hussey. He loves it out there. Jack's at 3. It's not his ideal place, but he's
doing more of it as well.
Sorry?
He's doing more of it at 3.
Well, yeah, he obviously got a ton in the IPL against Gujarat from number 3. He only averages 22 there, but strikes at 150. He's a good enough player to make it work. I think Bairstow, his recent resurgence in form is really good news for England. He'll slot in at 4. Then Brooke, who obviously hasn't been playing a huge amount of cricket because he pulled out of joining us at Delhi for very understandable reasons, but he's been tearing it up in the county championship. And I think for Brooke, he plays the same way across formats. Livingston is a concern at 6, given his form. Moeen will probably be picked at number 7 as the vice captain of the squad or of the team, and gives a bit of that balance. And then I think that's where we enter the interesting selection conundrums, which is, do they pick the 4 best bowlers, which is probably Jofra, Rashid, Wood and Topley, or do they get their knickers in a twist about number 8 needing to bat? They could go with that, with bringing in Tom Hartley as the extra spinner over one of the 3 specialist quicks and just pull things lower. Or they could bring in someone like Chris Jordan, whose batting has gone through the roof in the last 18 months, or obviously Sam Curran himself. But I think that's probably the least likely of the options because he's been in such poor form.
We're going to hear from Michael Yardy later in the show, but he had a massive role in that tournament, having essentially come out of the international wilderness. Could Hartley be similarly important this time round? Similar profile of player? I know that T20 cricket is very different, but you mentioned that some of those slower pitches, I guess we don't know how much England trust Will Jacks' bowling, for example. Obviously, he's been in another different direction to Jacks, but how much will they trust Liam Livingstone, for example? If they want 2 of their most bankable spinners, Tom Hartley comes into it.
Yeah, I think that Livingstone's bowling has actually been very little used in the IPL, but it's been quite effective when he has been. So I think he's finding a bit of form with that. I think Hartley's a really interesting one because obviously he's not actually played a huge amount of T20 cricket. And he's mainly been in the 100, which is a higher standard than the Blast. So I think that's why they're kind of willing to push him to the 4. He's a very flexible bowler. He can bowl in the power play, he can bowl in the middle. But when you look at England's opponents, because of this predestined route through to the knockouts, England kind of know who they're going to be playing where, really. And actually, most of the sides they're playing aren't right-hander heavy. There's a lot of left-handed heavy sides there. So you look at Australia, they've got Warner and Head at the top, and then probably they're going to go with Inglis over Matthew Wade with the gloves. And then it's just right-handers all the way down. So Hartley could play against Australia. That would make quite a lot of sense to get him into the tournament. But then you look at Pakistan, they could have Fakhar Zaman and Saim Ayub, both who absolutely belt slow left arm. South Africa have got Quinton de Kock and David Miller. I think both of them are in the top 5 or 6 quickest scorers against slow left arm ever. And then you've got the Windies, who are basically crying out for anyone who can bat right-handed. So it's actually quite tricky to get him into the side from a matchup perspective, not to be too dull. But I think as a result, you can almost see Hartley's, again, provided that England do get through, I'm doing best case scenario. But if England did reach the semi-finals, you could very easily see his first major contribution being against a right-handed heavy India, Guyana.
At Guyana, right? Where like Moti has a ridiculous record in
Exactly.
the CPL.
So I mean, again, it is like I am getting ahead of myself. But it's that's what previews are all about. It's interesting because they clearly just rate him as a character because of what went on in India. They clearly rate his ability to kind of get in the fight, and I think that that does matter, particularly in the absence of other kind of scrappers like Stokes. I think you want characters that you can rely on. But tactically, as I've said, it's an interesting one to see where he quite slots in.
Ben, of those 5 contenders that you mentioned, who do you think is most likely to challenge for the title?
Well, I have to make a confession here that I do struggle when just looking at a team of names on paper, especially in T20 cricket, when you don't see them play together as much. I feel like it's often like object impermanence or something. Like I look down a team with like good player, good player, good player, and I look at the next team be like good player, and I can forget and have no idea how to actually compare them to a previous team. You can sort of, pick little holes in teams here and there, but then sometimes you wonder like, how much does it matter? Like, is it the weakest link that matters the most, or actually, if a couple guys have brilliant tournaments, is that going to cover for the fact that India's number 8 isn't as strong as England's number 8 or whatever? Having said that, you look at India, that is a thing that leaps out and that always leaps out of India, and then you'd think, given that, you wouldn't invent a rule in your main tournament that means that you don't need all rounders in it, but that's what they've done. So at the moment, that the top 6 looks great. I guess they'd have Jadeja at 7, and then number 8 is going to be a proper specialist, the kind of guy who would bat 11 in England's side.
They could pick Akshar as well. They could go for the 2 slow left arms.
Yes, that's
then
true.
Go Kuldeep, Siraj, Bumrah.
The other thing I wonder is do they even they probably won't do this because they haven't done this, but you could really stuff it and just play Dubé and Pandya, have Shivam Dubé at number 7, and then you've got Jadeja at 8, and then your 3 specialist quicks, and you've got the thing is if Pandya's fit, he's a proper bowler, but it's just, do you want, and it's different relying on him for 10 overs a game versus relying on him for 4 overs a game, but they probably won't do that.
I think given the squad that they've picked, which has so many spinners in it, I think they'll pick Akshar at 8, and they'll just extend the batting, be willing to let Akshar bowl in the power play because that's what he does really well. Jadeja can bowl through the middle for spit, and then they haven't got enough seamers to be picking that many seamers in the side consistently. I think they're going to back Dubé and Hardik to bowl, and it won't be perfect. It's not going to be their strength. They're not going to win the tournament with their 3rd seamer, but Kuldeep, Akshar, Jadeja is terrifying on those pitches if they are on slow, low kind of slag heaps.
Yeah, and worth pointing out explicitly, they have 4 spinners in their squad, only 3 specialist seamers plus Hardik and Dubé, who doesn't do a lot of bowling, even though he is a seam bowling all-rounder. India have so few of them that he is sort of viewed as an all-round option, even though he barely bowls in the IPL, for example.
And Rohit's got some sort of plan there with the spin. He was asked when they announced the squad, like, why have you picked 4 spinners? And he was like, I know why, but I'm not telling you, basically, is what he said.
I think it's just when you look at the phase coverage, it's just really nice. Yeah, Akshar being able to bowl on the power play, and then Jadeja and Kuldeep through the middle. It's an aggressive spinner and a defensive spinner. And basically, Akshar's going to be bowling in tandem with Bumrah. So that's quite a nice place to be as a bowler, building pressure at the other end.
Yeah.
When England played West Indies in that tour at the end of 2023, they looked really good. And their lineup, when you actually list it out, looks incredibly fun. They're a bit short on pace bowling options. They've audaciously picked Shamar Joseph, who has never taken a professional T20 wicket, and he's one of 2 specialist seamers in that squad. They are obviously, as the home nation, they are well placed to have a proper run at the tournament after 2 properly duff efforts in 2021 and 2022.
I think, without wishing to be patronising, and it is annoying, and I hate it when people do it with Test cricket, but T20's better, so I'll say it. I think we all want the Windies to be really, really good in this tournament. It just feels like such a good story. They've got so many guys back. I mean, you look through. I think they'll line up something like Charles Hope, Puran, Hetmeyer, Rovman, Dre, Romario, Holder, Akil, Joseph, Alzari, and Shamar. I think that could be extremely good fun. Shafane Rutherford's on the bench, by the way. I think I can't see how you quite get him in the side. The level of batting ability, and specifically that almost archetypal Caribbean batting ability of unbelievably good against spin in slow low conditions, but also with pace hitting ability if it's up there in the slot. It's remarkable the level of depth that they've got, both from literally the number of players, but also how deep they can bat. They can have someone like Akil coming in at 9. He's batted number 7 in the Big Bash, and he's been effective there. They have got hitting all the way down, and it is all a bit samey. They are all of a mould.
But if
they got on a roll,
that effective,
well, yes.
What?
And we talk about guys that, the experience of playing in these conditions. Obviously, they're the home team. They have more information about these venues that are maybe only being played in domestic cricket. They are significantly ahead of the game in that front. So I would love them to be right up there in this competition.
You're as well placed as anyone to comment on this. Shai Hope's upturn in T20. I guess credibility is extraordinary. This guy, he had a reputation for not scoring quick enough in 50 over cricket, yet has had a decent IPL for your guys, Delhi, and he's managed to find a role for himself in one of the most destructive lineups in the world. What's happened there? Because he's not young.
I think there's some, in terms of why he's ended up in the side, I think there's some profile things there. Like we said, they were crying out for anyone who can bat right-handed. And before it's been Roston Chase and Brandon King, and Charles is probably the kind of consistent presence throughout. And so I think Hope benefits through that. But he has managed to take his game against spin to another level. His impacts and all of his numbers, underlying or otherwise against spin in the last few years have been much better and up there with that kind of tier 2 T20 batter, the guys below Claessens and Butler and Sky. And I think that makes a big difference, particularly at home when you are playing in these kind of conditions. I think it'll be interesting to see. He might open up, he might bat 3. I think he is the kind of implicit glue. So he does still need to bat with that bit of conservatism to allow these other guys to just go really, really hard. But I think that to step up at the age that he has been, he's always had this incredible ODI record where you look at the raw numbers and he's in an all-time 11 in ODI cricket. He's a freak, and obviously we all remember Headingley in 2017. But again, to take it to another level at his age, it just shows you that when players, I'm as guilty as anyone of pigeonholing players and saying, they're not a T20 player. But actually, given 6 months to focus, given a World Cup at home as an incentive, they'll go, actually, you know what, I'm going to not play in this competition. I'm going to go and play Bangladesh Premier League. I'm going to go and play LPL. I'm going to go and try and get some experience against the best of the best. And this is the result. He's not utterly world class, but he's really taken himself to the next level. And I hope he's part of, as I say, a very, very successful squad.
Ben, who do you think is going to win it? When I look at the squads, the two teams we've not really talked about much, I think look very strong on paper. Australia look uncomfortably strong for me with an England hat on. It's basically it's the same old guys who always do quite well and have won a lot in all formats. And then South Africa, who right now we've got the first qualifier in the 2024 IPL on the screen as we record, and Heinrich Klaassen is right up there with the very best T20 hitters in the world. David Miller, Quinton de Kock, obviously an outstanding pace attack that Lungi Ngidi couldn't even get in the squad. Which of those 5 teams that you mentioned, and on top of that you got Pakistan, New Zealand as well, which one do you fancy the most?
I mean, I don't know. Again, almost doesn't matter. You can say, you mug if you predict something wrong in this, but the thing with T20 cricket is that the best team has what we say like a 65% chance against one of the other really good teams, something like that. So this is a tournament where not anyone can beat anyone, but among that top 7, especially that top 5, anyone can beat anyone, But maybe I'd go with Australia, but maybe I think the universe will punish them for not picking the really good young guy. And then beyond them, maybe look at West Indies, but it is just so tough. And as you say, it's going to be, I think there's a bit of almost fatigue from this tournament coming on the back of such a long IPL that's been even more extended because you've only got double headers on one day of the week. And, we've had a break from Test cricket, so people are craving that a little bit. We've had another World Cup, which meant a lot more quite recently. I think there is, and especially among English cricket, when English summers don't tend to have something big in the middle of them that's not in England, there's a bit of why is this World Cup happening? But there is, there's lots of really, really well-matched teams, and the conditions thing does just add that extra layer of intrigue that I think will make this really, really interesting. So I think it is a really hard tournament to call. I think it would come from one of those 5 teams, I guess. And if I had to just stick my finger in the air, let's say I'd go Australia, West Indies, India, England, South Africa for a ranking of those 5. Why not?
Really had to drag that out of you, didn't we? Just to jump off that briefly, I think what is really nice is that everyone is relatively evenly balanced, and there is that slight split from the top to the mid-range teams. But I think anyone can beat anyone for that, all the reasons you've said. But also, there's a really nice tactical diversion with a lot of the teams. So the Windies probably aren't going to really bowl very well at any stage because they haven't really picked any good bowlers. You know, like I say, they've picked essentially a guy who doesn't play T20 cricket as one of their 2 specialist bowlers. They're going to be really batting heavy. Afghanistan and Sri Lanka have barely got a batter between them, but you look at their bowling lineup and it's basically IPL plus bowling lineup. There's some outstanding attacks there.
And it's worth saying, in terms of the group stage, those are the 2 most interesting groups. So Afghanistan are in a group with West Indies and New Zealand, and Afghanistan play New Zealand at Guyana, I think.
I think so, yeah.
That could be you could easily see Rashid Khan doing something there, spinning wise. And then Sri Lanka, Bangladesh could well be a shootout for a Super 8 spot as well.
With Wanindu Hasaranga, who unretired from Test cricket to make himself available for the tournament.
But you look at the players. It's guys who are the fun players in the IPL. It's Patirana, it's Dushara, it's Dikshana, it's Hasaranga. It's the guys who you're like, I want to watch them. It's Naveen with his amazing action. It's like all of them packed into 2 attacks. I just think you, on those days where you're looking and thinking, do I want to watch Sri Lanka versus the Nepal? And you think, actually, yeah, because I want to see these guys. They're all box office.
I think the format is against those 2 teams, because I think on their day they can be anyone, but because it's a Super 8 rather than a quarterfinal, I could see how they could sort of win 3 games on their day. You know, Rashid and Noor literally just bowl into victory. But I think because you basically have 2 sets of group stages, that's why I think like Afghanistan in particular, even though they have so many T20 A-list names in their squad, I don't think they'll have enough. Similar to what we saw in the 50 over World Cup, in the very capable of beating anyone on their day, but probably not consistent enough with this format to go all the way.
Yeah, I mean, you look at just on a very simple level, you look at the bowling lineup and it's guys who are playing IPL, and you look at the batters and it's Gurbaz, who's going to play for KKR now that Phil Salt's gone home, and it's Gulbuddin Naib, who's kind of been drafted in as an injury replacement for Delhi. The coverage is not the same. I think it, on balance, I like the structure of having 2 group stages, because I think it gives everyone a chance, and it gives chance for narratives to percolate and grow across a month. But yeah, you're right. It does slightly take away the opportunity for those guys to just rock up, smack 60 off 20, and then bowl someone out for spit.
Yeah, and we're saying actually that the second group stage, which is that is what decides who goes into the semi-finals. It's pretty compact. It only takes 5 days. So from 19th of June to 24th of June, that's when all of those second group stage games in the Super 8s take place, and then the semi-finals and the final take place over the space of only 4 days, actually, from the 26th of June to the 29th of June. Ben, just finally on South Africa and Australia, how do you see them going?
I love South Africa, but every single ICC event of my professional career, I say I think South Africa are going to win it, and then they bomb out because that's what they always do. I think that the form of that middle order is freakish for South Africa, of Klaassen and guys like Markram, and if QDK can get a bit of form back as well. I do think that Stubbs, again, got my Delhi hat on. He's been absolutely outrageous for 2 months. I think he is ready to go kind of stratospheric now. Put that with David Miller at the end. Very few sides as a strategic, strategic pattern across world cricket. There's very few sides that have got backloaded.
Yeah,
it's West Indies are one, but a lot of sides their hitting's at the top. South Africa are different. They have got proper middle order power, and I think that in crunch matches it matters because they're the guys that are going to get you over the line. Australia, I go back and forth on them because their record in the Caribbean isn't great. You look at the squad experience, they've not played a lot of cricket over there at all in T20 internationals, but they always find a way. They always overperform. And actually, you look at the raw quality in that side. Travis Head's, we're watching him out the corner of our eyes. This last 2 months, he's been outrageous. Warner has played in CPL as well. He's one of the few guys that's got that experience. There is still an intrinsic knowledge of how to win there, and I know that's not very analytical, but they just understand how to when are the big moments. And I think the bowling attack is interesting, not to get too granular, but I think Stark, 24 crore, whatever he is, there's a reasonable argument they shouldn't pick him and pick Nathan Ellis because their death bowling has been atrocious this cycle. They've got whacked everywhere they've gone. Cummins has got to play. Hazelwood's got to play for that front-loaded thing, and then Zampa's always going to play as the spinner. You can make a very decent argument that Ellis, who's got a really, really nice death bowling record in recent years, or Spencer Johnson, who's not even in the squad, would have been a nice option. I think they could have selected a squad that made them stronger favourites, but I think they're in the top 3, like Ben said. I think they'll be there or thereabouts.
Yeah, for me, the thing with Australia is I think they're just so good at reacting to what's in front of them, and I think partly they will almost use the lack of recent T20 experience in that part of the world in their favour. Actually, I think they'll actually go like, we don't have any ideas.
Super pragmatic.
We're going to see what's in front of us, what's the best combination for what's in front of us, and trust those players who sure might not have played a lot of T20 cricket in that part of the world. Just trust their players to adapt to what is the task at hand now, because they've got a team packed full of guys who just win
and also
matches and tournaments.
Also packed full of all-rounders, I think,
Yeah.
in terms of if you want to be super pragmatic and you want to change game to game and, make decisions on the fly, having Stoinis and Marsh and Maxwell and Agar and Green all in that team or all in that squad does mean that you're never really going to be short of an option to get a guy in. You're always going to be able to find a route into the side for anyone on the bench.
Over the summer, we will occasionally be looking back at particular moments in time in association with Rado, the first official timing partner of the ECB. For this week's show, I talked to 2010 England World T20 winner Michael Yardy about their triumph in the Caribbean 14 years ago. Yardy played a crucial role in the first England men's side to win a major limited overs title. He was an ever-present in the England 11, coming back for his first taste of international cricket in 3 years, going at less than 7 runs and over the course of the competition. So, Mike, that England team, it's the first England team to win a men's World Cup, men's white ball World Cup. And your role in it's quite interesting. You'd gone 3 years without playing a T20I for England before that tournament. Do you want to talk through your journey back into the side ahead of the 2010 World T20?
Yes, I think I last played for England in 2007. And then I think I went on a kind of Lions tour in 2008. And that was kind of my last experience of England, really. And then the season before, I took over the captaincy at Sussex in 2009, I think. Yeah, 2009. And we had a really successful T20 campaign. I bowled. I was in the middle and bowled them, effectively. And then back in then, there was a kind of Champions League. Top 2 teams from domestic competitions. Us and Somerset went out there. And it was basically a kind of 2-week tournament where, the best 2 teams, so from all over, really. And it was, I think we had a couple of games that we ended up losing on a super over, but I performed relatively well out there. So it was kind of a bit more of a exposure in terms of tournament-wise. And then I kind of got inklings that maybe I'd have a chance of getting picked for the T20 World Cup. And then eventually did. So it was, and I kind of, my thinking on it was kind of like, I didn't see this time. Sometimes when I play for England, I kind of thought, I want to play for a long period of time. Well, this one, I just thought I've been picked for a T20 World Cup, no kind of expectations of kind of future stuff, just kind of go out there and kind of try and perform as well as you can, help the team win a few games and enjoy the experience. So it was, I kind of I was really comfortable with where I was at as a cricketer, that I just wanted to go out there and kind of enjoy the experience of playing for England again, rather than put a huge amount of expectation.
Did that Champions League experience give you a bit of confidence as well? Obviously, doing it against big teams from other competitions, etc.
Yeah, I suppose it did a little bit. I think I suppose I knew myself quite well as a 2020 bowler. I was kind of and all through my career, I think I always knew what I was good at and my limitations, and never had a kind of thought that I was any better than I was. But I also appreciate what skills I had that were effective. So I kind of was quite pragmatic in my views as a bowler, because I think I've always, through my career, even though I play for England mainly as an all-rounder, I always view myself as a batter who maybe bowled a bit. But in T20 cricket, I really appreciated that I was a very effective bowler, but had that. My biggest strength was kind of that I was a batter, that I could read batsmen and kind of have a little bit of an understanding what they were trying to do. So, I think the tournament, whenever you play abroad and you haven't played abroad for a little while and against different teams, it gives you a little bit more confirmation you're doing okay. So,
when did that transition to bowling in T20 cricket come? Because in first class cricket, your numbers as a batter were excellent, and you end up playing a massive role for England as a predominantly a bowler.
Yeah, I think it's just a strange one, actually, because I originally bowled seam and gave that up quite quickly because it wasn't very good. But yeah, and I think because I played with, when I first started bowling spin, I actually bowled it very differently to how I ended up bowling in T20 cricket. I was kind of a bit more kind of bowled it a lot slower with different shape. But I suppose I never really got the opportunity to bowl in 4-day cricket because we had Mushtaq Ahmed at Sussex, and he bowled all the overs and got all the wickets. So there was no reason for me to bowl. So I quickly worked out an effective style in T20 cricket that wasn't necessarily there as a kind of trying to take wickets, but very much, or if I was trying to take wickets, it was very much by trying to stop the batter scoring. And I always enjoyed that kind of challenge, and that's how I saw it. So, and if the conditions suited, then that would bring in more kind of wicket taking options.
When did you first link up with the squad? Because it's quite an interesting group looking back on it, because you had several guys who were a big part of that famous England side who did so much across formats and ended up combusting only 2 or 3 years later. But you also had people like yourself, Michael Lum, and Craig Kieswetter, who hadn't previously been involved in the setup. So what was it like as a group? Do you remember first joining it?
I remember there was a group that went to, and I think there was an England game versus England Lions, and I think that's where kind of Lummy and Craig Kieswetter got picked. They did well against England for the Lions, and they kind of like this. And I think Andy Flower at the time probably saw them as a really explosive opening partnership and took a punt on them. So it wasn't like a 3-year or 2-year plan where you build the team up. It was like you're saying, there was a few people coming in. I was one of them, and it was very much a kind of team pick for that specific tournament. And you quickly, I played with a lot of the lads, or played against a lot of lads. So you know them, previously. And I remember, I think we played some warm-up games, and I went for dinner with Luke Wright and Stuart Broad, and we ended up, I think, chatting through it, and it was I think probably the confident guy anyway, but he was like, I think we've got a really good chance here. I think, I look at our team, and I think we've got all kind of bases covered, and it was kind of like just before the tournament, you kind of thought, we look at, we've beaten South Africa and Bangladesh comfortably in warm-up games, you're thinking we're in a good space to go, and then that just got built upon pretty much, particularly from the Super 6 phase onwards. It just felt like everyone was really clear in their role, and everyone had belief in each other, and that kind of escalated all the way through the tournament.
Do you have any specific chats with Collingwood or Flower about your specific role going into the tournament?
I did. I remember speaking to Andy on the phone, and I remember him talking. Actually, it was really weird. And I use this kind of quite a lot now. Is that he spoke all about my batting. He never really spoke about my bowling. He kind of like, these are the kind of roles you might play with the bat. And I don't know. I've never spoken to him about it since, but I don't know whether it was a kind of, whether he was doing that intentionally because it actually took the pressure off my bowling, and whether he thought, well, he views himself as a batter. So that was all. Yeah. So I always look back at my career. Every time I kind of viewed myself as a batter, I always bowled well, even if I didn't necessarily play a big role with the bat. Is when I probably thought, I've got to bowl well here because I'm ended up in a, and there isn't a role for me batting. I put too much pressure on something. So yeah, I thought it was like it was really helpful for me. It was kind of okay, right, I'm going to play a batting role, and then all of a sudden, I think I only batted twice in the tournament. So it was, but it gave me the confidence that he saw me as an all rounder. So so I did speak to him, and then Collie I think he was very clear in his kind of nothing kind of too structured, but kind of always giving players confidence and giving belief in how we were going to play, and knowing that that what was happening during the tournament was working, and I think that was good, and a very kind of relaxed type environment as well.
What's striking looking back at it now is how specific every bowler's roles were. So pretty much every game, the same 5 guys bowled 4 overs. I think there were only 2 games where a 6th bowler was used, and I think in both occasions they only bowled 1 over. Did it feel like you were part of a really well-oiled unit where everyone knew exactly what they're doing, what phases you were bowling in, what your plans were, etc.?
Yeah, I think so, and I suppose I think because everyone was bowling well, and there was only the odd over where, I think everyone had a bad over in the tournament, and that's where it kind of, works around. But I suppose people doing their roles really well, you wouldn't change it. So, sometimes people, if people aren't performing, then you end up having to chop and change and do loads of different types of things. So, I think it was everyone was really clear on the roles, and then as a bowling unit, I think we delivered it really well. It was only, I look at the tournament and I bowled with one over that went for 20, and and the rest of it I was kind of quite miserly and all the way through. So, and that was in the final. But it was I think I was lucky in a way, because I was lucky enough to bowl with Swanee, and Swanee was the world's best at the time, and I was really clear on my role, and then had no expectation of having to do anything rather than what I did, because I knew the kind of pressure, from a scoring point of view, but also from a wicket taking point of view, that he was doing at the other end, and his mentality. So that made my role kind of easier.
As a fellow finger spinner, what was it like watching Swanee at work at the other end? Because I don't think people realise his T20 record for England is totally ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, he's, as I say, he's brilliant. And the one thing I learned from Swanee was, I remember I always felt like, particularly in domestic cricket, I would always bowl at the kind of into the wind or up the hill, or kind of to the short boundary leg side, and that was always my role and everything. And I kind of, when we played at Barbados, there was a breeze coming at me, bowling, that was fine. Then we got to St Lucia, and I spoke to Swanee, and there was a short boundary on the leg side on one side, and it was bowls off spin, so it's hitting into that side. And I said to him, I'll be on that end, and he bowl this end. He goes, no, I want to bowl this end, with the short, to the short boundary. And I was like, because just there's a little bit of breeze, and I think I can, if I can get a little bit of breeze and spin it back. And always mentality was about how he's going to take wickets. He wasn't worried about the kind of being hit to the short boundary or protecting his figures. All we kept thinking about was like, I need what's in my favour. I need to use that. So I use that a lot now when I speak to players. That kind of mentality. And Mushtaq Ahmed is exactly the same. It's not about kind of protecting stuff. It's more around kind of what's in my favour and how can I use it. And that's what I learned from Swanee. And that's he had the skills, but also he had the mentality to kind of want to show how good he was.
And another thing that stood out from the bowling attack, I guess more for the seamers, was you as a team used slow balls probably more than other groups did at the time. Was that a decision that someone made ahead of the tournament, or was that just reacting to the sort of surfaces you came across in the Caribbean?
I think it was a little bit of. I can remember. I remember it kind of the first time that anyone really used lots of slow ball bouncers, and that's what Broadie, Brezzy, and Ryan Sidebottom did. They used lots of slower ball bouncers into the pitch, and they became really effective. I don't know how it kind of came about, but that was just the kind of thing that, like everything, I think it just through the tournament it just went on, and people go, well, this is working. We'll just keep doing it, and keep sticking to what your strengths are, and that kind of works. So that was something I remember. I remember kind of the end of innings. Particularly at St Lucia, we played New Zealand and Sri Lanka. There was a big boundary one side, and they kept bowling slow balls into the pitch, and it was hard work for the batters. So.
You mentioned how encouraging your build-up was to the tournament, but you guys had a scare in your second group game against Ireland. You only scored 120, and then the rain comes down, and because there was rain in the England-West Indies game in the first set of fixtures, that sort of saved England and got you through to the next round. Was that, obviously you got through it, but was that a dent to the confidence at all?
No, I think it was just a relief, because I think there was the confidence there, and we played the West Indies. I think we got 197 or something, which I think at the time was 20, 25, 30 over par. And then it rained, and the Duckworth Lewis came out, and it was something like 60 off 6 overs.
Yeah, it was exactly that, 60 off 6.
Yeah, so, and it was like, and that was, we were thinking, did we get 190 or that? I remember just...
Yeah, I think England got 191, and then it was 60 off 6 overs.
Yeah, and which felt, I think there was a bit of a kind of feeling that was really harsh. That's nearly, we were scoring at over 9.5 and over, and they in a short and chase with 10 wickets. So there was that, we ended up losing that, I think, in the last over, and I think Chris Gale whacked it, and so there was a little bit of a feeling of we got a little bit hard done by there. So because we were in a position to win that, and then the Ireland game, I think it wasn't a great pitch, and I think if it had gone to 20 overs, I think it would have been really hard to beat. I know, like, even now you think 120 is difficult to defend, but I think back then on that pitch, it wasn't a great pitch. But again, if it had been a shortened game, like it was, I think it was, and I think it just, I remember it cleared up, and it looked like we were going to get back on for a short and chase, and then all of a sudden this cloud come over and just finished the game off. And I remember getting to Barbados, and there was a huge relief, because not because or we didn't want to go out at that stage of the tournament, because I think there was a genuine belief that we could go really far in the tournament, and it felt like, we could have been it could have been taken away from us.
And the tournament really clicked into gear in your game against Pakistan. You took 2 for 19 off 4 overs. That you got Misbah and Hafiz out, and then you beat a strong South Africa side, strong New Zealand side. At that point, having won those 3 games back to back, did you feel at that point, you know what, despite England's record in major white ball tournaments, you guys had a real shot at winning this thing?
Yeah, I think also the thing about, I think, with the players is that not many of us have experienced a huge amount of white ball tournaments. You don't think, how do England get on in the kind of in semis and not do well in tournaments? You don't really think about that. You just you're living on a bit of a crest of the wave when you're taking that confidence. I think if you're not confident, you start thinking about things that have happened in the past. So I remember the Pakistan game, and I think that was KP really got going that game, and then I just remember him facing Dale Steyn in the South Africa game and putting him over the roof, and it was just incredible to watch. So I mean, that's the thing. He won Player of the Tournament, and his performances were just unreal. It was like, it was sometimes he walked out to the middle and it felt like he was 8 foot tall. I remember Sean Tate bowling quickly at him and him kind of putting him over his head and then pulling him front square for 4, and it was like he was playing a different game sometimes.
Did that give the rest of you confidence, seeing a teammate go out there and sort of have that swagger and sort of look the best players in the world in the eye and take them on?
100%. I think that makes such a... when Owen Morgan was only young at the time, but he was immediately kind of doing stuff that, he didn't do it later in his career, but he's like his flips and reverses and things like that. And he was doing stuff that I don't think had been seen much before. And he was, doing it so well. And it was just... So it gives a huge amount of confidence when people are doing stuff, and you're thinking, Jesus, guy's an unbelievable bowler, and they were taking him down. And that's, I've named 2 there, but there were, the opening partnership was really effective, and so there were so many things that were going well, where when people are doing things well, it does breed confidence through the team.
What was a young Owen Morgan like? Because he becomes the dawn of English white ball cricket by the end of his career. Oversaw the 2019 World Cup, of course, and sort of oversaw a change in style that English cricket is still following. What was he like as a young member of that team? I just
think he just had this air of confidence about him and kind of calmness and all the stuff, I think, that he's shown all the way through to help England be what they are now as a white ball team, and over a long period of time. I think I could see that in a young player then. It was like he was just very calm, very confident, very assured, top guy in the dressing room, and and that was it. And I think he just carried on, and probably over his career got more and more confident in what he was doing, understanding what he was doing, and then played a huge part, like you say, in kind of where England are right now in white ball cricket.
And what are your memories of the final? Australia were 8 for 3 or something like that.
Yes, so... yeah, I do. I remember. I was at third man. I remember kind of. It was very bouncy, and then it was quite. Yeah, I think off the top of my head, one was dropped and then caught a slip. I can't remember who that was, but so I remember them being in a little bit of trouble. But they were in a lot of trouble actually, and then they came out and you could they I think they ended up they took me down for 20 in an over. The first over I really got hurt in the tournament, but they had to really, because they were so far behind the game, and also with Swanee bowling at the other end, had to kind of target someone, so they took me down. So they kind of. But I remember coming off halfway, and we were thinking, obviously they had a score in the final, but they were still quite. Felt like they were quite a way short, and then the way we kind of started. Yeah, but even I look back now and I think it felt like I think they got 140 odd, or 148, something like that. But those runs felt heavy towards the last 30, 40. It felt like, where I think most games you think, oh yeah, we're cruising this because we were a long way ahead in the game. But because I remember being told to get my pads on and get ready because I might go in next if Morgan got out. So immediately I went from someone who was quite relaxed to someone who felt, I think it was like 15 runs left. I was thinking... Yeah, it would have felt like so many runs, but Collie and Moles got us over the line, so I didn't have to bat.
And what was it like celebrating a World Cup victory in the Caribbean. That sounds like a good place to win a World Cup.
Amazing, isn't it? It's like Barbados is, incredible place. So it's I think unbelievable. I just think there was so many good things from that tournament, because some games, I think, so many amazing things, obviously from the final. But I remember one game we started at 9:30 and we were finished by 1:30. Back at the hotel, just kind of relaxing after, and that it felt like a bit of a pinch yourself stuff because 1:30 in the afternoon, your work's done and you just help, playing to get an England win. Do you know what I mean? It felt a bit incredible. It's probably, because all the kind of 2020 games usually finish late at night and things like that. But it felt like you had the whole day to enjoy it, or half the day to enjoy it. So, and that was the same with the final. It was so much to kind of save and remember.
A slightly different to the county grind, isn't it? Finishing a game.
It's different, isn't it? It's so different.
Barbados.
It's very different. But I kind of look back very fondly on those memories, that memory of playing for England at that time, because, like I say, there was just confidence all the way through the dressing room, and when there's confidence, there's a lot of enjoyment as well. So.
It wasn't that long after the World Cup where you first pulled out of an England series. Were you struggling with stuff behind the scenes during the World Cup as well?
No, I think no. It was probably after the World Cup, probably a couple of months after the World Cup. I don't know why, but something kind of switched. I'd struggled previously, but like I said, I was in a really good spot for about a year and had a good perspective on everything and how my cricket was going, life was going, things like that. So I think. Yeah, it was that I don't know. So during that World Cup, like I say, I had a real kind of good mindset in terms of no expectation of what might happen in the future, but kind of I'm just going to enjoy playing for England again, and what will be kind of thing. And obviously with that you work really hard and you're trying to do as well as you can, but not kind of put too much pressure on yourself. So.
And 14 years on, how do you reflect on that period, having a year of such extreme highs and lows?
Oh God, yeah, it's I think it's. I look back at it and go, it's just part of life, isn't it? It's kind of like that is life, isn't it? It's kind of like you don't obviously not all the time do you experience such a high, and then obviously within a year then have such a low kind of thing. But I don't know now, a bit older, a bit more grey hair, a bit more perspective on kind of life and how that was. So now I probably a few years ago I didn't look too much into it, but now I look quite fondly on experiences I've had and kind of how they kind of shape the rest of your life. And
to be part of such a memorable England team as well. English cricket even now has still only had the odd bit of success in white ball cricket, and to be part of such a successful team with so many great players must be an amazing thing to look back on.
Well, I do, because I think I played 42 times for England, of which 14 were T20s and 7 were in that tournament. So I kind of look at it and go, I was lucky. I never say I was lucky. I was lucky that kind of those 7 of those 14 games come as part of a really successful group of players that ended up winning a T20 World Cup. So yeah, I think time is everything, isn't it? So, because that's it. Timing is everything. So, I do feel very lucky and fortunate that I played in that team and really enjoyed it.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Mike. It's been really fun revisiting that tournament. Cheers for your time.
Cheers. I'll speak to you soon.
You can discover the Rado Captain Cook high-tech ceramic Rado England Cricket limited edition watch, a Swiss watchmaking technology masterpiece limited to 150 pieces that celebrates the collaboration of Swiss watch brand Rado and England Cricket. Don't miss your chance to own this exceptional and unique timepiece. Visit rado.com now to secure yours or explore Rado's authorised retailers. England women beat Pakistan 3-0 in a T20I series. The last 2 games happened over the weekend. To hear our reaction to that, listen to the next episode of the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast, which will be out in a couple of days' time. As we mentioned earlier, the IPL playoffs not only taking place this week, they're happening right now. As we're recording, the first qualifier between KKR and the Sunrisers is happening as we record.
Yeah, so Ben's actually written off Mitchell Starc about half an hour after he's taken 3 new ball wickets. So
I'm actually the only one with my back to the screen, so I'm working with a hell of a lot less information.
RCB and Rajasthan are the other 2 to make the top 4. Just on RCB, Ben, they've qualified for the top 4 despite winning just one of their first 8 games. How the hell did they do that?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, so one of our Wisden India writers, Nama Nagarwal's written a good piece on it, but just revisiting what Reece Topley said in the press conference after that 8th game, so that 7th loss, and he had to check with the reporter, like, were they actually officially out of contention? He was then told no, but then was basically told, oh, well, I guess we've got to give it a go then. Who knows? If we win a few, that looks like quite a good season. And then all of a sudden they do it, and they do it by the skin of their teeth as well. You know, a net run rate swing in the final game against CSK. So they you know, the game looks comfortable, but if CSK had scored just a handful more runs, they'd have lost the game, but won the prize of the playoff spot. The argument that now makes in his piece of that it's particularly improvement against hitting spin that has been there. That's been there, the thing that's driven them onwards. I also think that a large part of it is kind of Kohli's form, and it's one of those weird things where you just look at, you know, Kohli is kind of always going to average something insane in the IPL, but actually you can like pinpoint specific things in his record that, like, you know, at times might work against his team, or that might, you know, that you can see those, like this when Kohli's batting really well, and this when he's just in his kind of like white ball churning runs out mode that's not having the same impact for his side. And this against spin in the middle overs is the main thing for him, and he just flicked a switch at some point, basically.
We started sweeping, hasn't he?
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, he's kind of re-added that shot to his arsenal, and that's, you know, huge for India as much as it is for RCB, and because, you know, who knows where this ends up. I mean, RCB still need to win 3 games in a row, so they'll need to have gone 9 in a row to have won the IPL, which, you know, who knows. But you know, that's hugely impactful for India as well, I think.
It's worth saying as well that the last time a team finished outside the top 2 and won the tournament was Sunrisers in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to win from outside the qualifier 1. But I think the other thing that's worth mentioning is just the power play batting, full stop.
Mm-hmm.
I think they lose to Sunrisers, they concede 280. They look bereft, but they obviously go quite close with the batting, and it's almost like they were just starting to realise, geez, we've got gears in us here. We can go harder, and particularly Faf and Virat at the top. I saw some stats on Twitter. I think it's from Rohit Sankar on Twitter. Posted something saying that 7.9 was their run rate in the power play before the SRH game, and since then it's been 10.8. So it's gone up 3 runs per over. That's a significant uptick. And also, the form of Patidar in the middle against spin. Swapnil Singh's come in and been much more effective. They weren't taking power play wickets, and that's given them some options there. They're just finding a way to win, and it does. The RCB, I mean, my very good friend Freddie Wild is out there at the moment, and has been for the last few months. And bless him, he didn't win many games during the World Cup, but his mood's significantly improved in the last few weeks. And since they've adopted this new strategy of this ultra aggressive batting, they look like the team to beat. I don't think they'll win it, because it's really hard to win from that position. 9 in a row doesn't happen. But the most important thing from them is going into a mega auction. They've gone from being a laughingstock from 8, and they've just appointed a new coach, new captain probably for the new cycle. All of that. Suddenly they're going into it, regardless. If they lose the eliminator and they go out, they go into that mega auction cycle with optimism and with everyone sure of their jobs, and with everyone given the opportunity to hopefully do their best at the recruitment stage.
KKR topped the table in the end. It's been a long time since they were a genuinely successful force in the IPL. We've talked a lot about Salt and his combination with Sunil Narayan up top. It is more than that, though. They have extraordinary batting depth. Like Andre Russell, I think, has batted 8 a couple of times. That obviously looks very good on paper. Is it as simple as that? Or, you know, Mitchell Stark hasn't had a great tournament. He's had a good day today. But why have they done so well and been so consistent?
I think that you're right to highlight the Dre usage, because I think they have embraced the impact player rule really effectively, and they've used it to get guys in really hyper-specific situations. So getting Dre to bat against pace at the death and just keep delaying his position and throwing guys up. And Ryan helps with that, because he's obviously a T20 cheat code and he's best player in the world, but they've been very creative with that. I think what's interesting is that ahead of the season, you know, looking at the data, their squad or their batting lineup particularly quite susceptible to the short ball and susceptible to high pace specifically. And obviously with the introduction of the 2 bouncers rule, I was anticipating that actually I think they're going to struggle. And I know everyone talks about Shreyas Iyer being the archetypal example of that, but the pattern is across the board. And actually, it's not really been the case. It's not borne out. And I think that's partly because of good conditions, but also they just seem to have embraced it and taken it on. They're the fastest scoring T20 side ever in history for any league. SRH, who they're playing right now, are the second. So it's a bit of a unique season. I think it's just that collective buy-in, seemingly. And guys like Ramandeep coming in and playing cameos just shows that he's a guy who's got less than 1,000 career runs in T20 cricket, but can find a way to reach the boundary.
And I think the top two sides, I think either they were set up for it or they just recognised that this was going to be a season unlike any other first. And so KKR did it by, like, the most obvious thing is just by pushing Narayan up, because we've seen it ages ago in the IPL that he could do this opening thing, but it had been a long time since it succeeded. But then I think maybe they just realised these batting conditions are a lot better than we have seen before. We also have the impact player rule that means if we do lose an early wicket, then that's not so big a deal. Why don't we give the Narayan thing a go? It turned out he was in the form of his life, and that's now worked for them. And then some risers, they kind of all just go crazy, and that's worked really well. The interesting the contrast with them is in terms of the ball. Like KKR have been they've had 6 bowlers who have taken more than 8 wickets, and no one else has taken even 1 wicket. Whereas Sunrise, I think, have only got 3 players who have reached that 6-wicket mark. I think they've got about 10 wicket takers. So there's a contrast there. And then also, encouragingly from the West Indies point of view, is that Russell he's had a decent campaign with the ball as well. He's their leading wicket taker, or at least was until that start burst.
He's arguably been better with the ball than he's been with the bat, to be honest. He's been really, really effective. I think KKR are a more rounded side. I think Sunrisers are reliant on a few guys to really step up. And if they don't, then particularly if they don't fire at the top of the order, I know Klaassen comes in later, but I think he really thrives off having that platform to come in. And who doesn't when you're 100 for none after 6 overs? I think that is a significant difference. I remember back at the auction, the last mini auction, where I was out there in Dubai, speaking to Nathan Lehman, the KKR analyst, after they'd done their work. And there was I've known Nathan for a few years. We wrote a book together. There was a little glint in his eye. Fair play. I think he did know what they had up their sleeve with Ryan. I think he knew what was. They had a tactical plan in mind with the recruitment, and that's why they were able to go so hard for Stark. They were able to throw good money after bad. He's not worth 24 crore, nobody is. But he's the player they need.
In that specific auction scenario where they needed an overseas quick, he was the one available, so why not use all your money on it?
If you identify that that's your guy, then he's worth what he's worth. It doesn't really matter.
By the way, my favourite thing in IPL cricket just happened. I love it when an impact player comes in and gets the first baller. Sanveer Singh, career average 45, subbed in because Hyderabad aren't going particularly well, out for a first baller off Sunil Narayan.
It is just a silly rule, isn't it?
It is.
I love it from a tactical perspective because it is interesting, but come on, lads.
It is quite good fun. Just on the KKR combinations working. Part of Salt having such a good tournament, right, is that Narayan's at the other end, so no one opens with left arm spin. Is that part of it?
Yeah, obviously.
But if you're an England fan listening to this and you haven't watched a lot of the IPL, England are very right hand heavy. That top 5 that you listed out is likely to play. You think that opposition are likely to look to spin the ball away to that England top 5. And that is just something that Salt has not come against in the IPL.
Yeah, I mean, you look at England's... so I'm just trying to get my numbers up in front of me. England's record against slow left arm and leg spin in this World Cup cycle is down there with the worst in the world. And I think it's because of that. They don't have a lot of left-handers. And, matchups can get overrated, particularly in this current iteration of cricket, of T20 cricket, where I think it's more about quality than it is about specific matchups. But... yeah, England do have a weakness against that, and I think that's why Ben Duckett's in the squad, almost as a kind of, break glass for Duckett to kind of come in and just sweep some slow left armers for a bit. I think that it ties into a broader pattern of play for England, which is I think that we'll see. We will continue to see the conservative version of Jos Buttler, the guy who will take a little bit of time to get set, go 4 overs, and then go hard. And Salt and Jax are essentially, they're not the same player, but they have similar kind of tempos. They will go hard and Jos will bat through, and that will also involve managing that slow left arm and leg spin at the top of the innings, because if he can take the strike of that and then Salt's facing the 83 mile an hour seamer at the other end, that's where the carnage is going to be. You can have a bit of calm at the other end. And I think especially with England's potential concerns around batting depth, with that number 8 either being Hartley or Jordan, it could be Curran, but like I say, I don't think it will be. Jos taking a bit more responsibility and batting a bit longer is probably even more significant.
But that is the one thing about Sam Curran. And again, if people haven't watched the IPL too closely, be surprised that he's basically batted in the top order for Punjab Kings for most of the season. And if England do think, there's a slow left armer who's got a bit of, I know they can also promote Moeen, but there is that floating option as well for Sam Curran. Yeah.
And also, but it's a basic point, but it's one coaches always throw at me when I make the point, is that promoting someone involves losing a wicket. So it's clearly not gone very well.
Yes, yeah.
So you don't necessarily want to be throwing Moeen up to counter the slow left arm when you're 1 for 1 after 3 balls.
Yeah.
So actually having someone who could naturally bat at the top would be ideal. It's not the case for England, but they've got other areas covered. I think they're going to be tactically really interesting to watch as a result.
That is everything for today. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Ben. We'll be back for the next episode of the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly Podcast in 2 days' time.